My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to Safety Labs. The safety industry relies on research from other fields and generates plenty of research of its own. But is that research helpful? Specifically, does it make a difference in the practices of safety professionals? Today's guest thinks that the information's journey from researcher to practitioner could improve in a number of ways. I'll ask him how and in what ways this information journey isn't working, and more importantly, what we can do to make it better. Dr. Matt Law is a researcher, business strategist, award-winning author, and global speaker. He hosts Prove It to Me, a podcast that reviews total worker health, occupational health, and safety, nutrition, and lifestyle research in an effort to provide practitioners with a grounded perspective on published research, its impact to practice, and actionable takeaways. Matt's a certified safety professional, a registered environmental health specialist, and holds a Doctor of Public Health degree from Walden University. His experience includes management of programs and initiatives in public health, construction, biotech, manufacturing, and military applications. And Matt joins us from Florida. Welcome.
Thanks, Mary. Glad to be here. Before we get started, I do have a quick disclaimer. So the views and opinions I express in this podcast are my own and do not represent the opinions or strategies of any of my employers. I am not here in my capacity as a representative of any of my employers.
Good to know. Okay, so let's get into it. You caught our producer's attention with a LinkedIn post you wrote a few months ago about the top 5 reasons why research sucks.
Yes.
Now, this wasn't this wasn't a standard social media rant. You had specific reasons, and I'd like to walk through them as well as ask a few more general questions about safety research. So, can you give us a lay of the land in terms of safety research in the US? Or, I mean, if you have a global perspective, that's great, whatever you feel comfortable with. But how much research goes on? How is it funded? Where is it published? Yeah, I know that was three questions all at once.
Sure. Well, I can kind of give an overall perspective here. Thankfully, there is a lot of research that's being done in really the total worker health space, but especially in health and safety, occupational health and safety across the globe. So when I was working on my doctoral research, I researched the risk perceptions of foreign-born construction workers in Central Florida. Now, to do this, I have to do a literature review and find out, well, what other research has been done in this area. And it turns out there's actually been a lot of work done on not just identifying risk perceptions of workers, but there is the issues that we have with the vulnerabilities of foreign-born workers here in the US is the same if you go to the UK, if you go to China, if you go to Italy, if you go to all of these other first world countries in the world. A lot of them have foreign-born workers coming in that are taking higher risk jobs, especially in construction. That's not an issue that's original to the US. So thankfully, there is a lot of research going on all sorts of different subjects. We're looking at risk perceptions, we're looking at behaviors, we're looking at human and organizational performance. All of these different things are being explored. And the degree to which that exploration happens varies across all of these different studies. Some of them are very limited and very confined to specific things. Others are a little bit more comprehensive. And there's good and bad research that happens out there, just like there is with any other field. So a lot of my work recently, especially with the podcast, the Prove It To Me podcast, has been going through a lot of these different studies and understanding what's really happening out there. What can we take from that research and put into practice? And what's good and what's bad about the research that's out there, and what else do we need to do?
So that's a perfect segue into my next question, which was, One of the points you made on the post was that there's too much bad research. So in this context, can you define what constitutes bad?
There's any number of things that can make a research study bad. One good place to start, if you're looking at any type of specific study, one good place to start is to find the limitations section. So number one red flag would be if there are no limitations to the study. A lot of times, I mean, there's always limitations to research. There's no way that any one study is going to be able to look at an issue from all different angles. There are going to be limitations. Either, we've got a convenience sample, so it's not a totally experimental study, or maybe, we just didn't have a large enough sample size to do extremely accurate statistical analysis, or maybe it's a qualitative study, and qualitative studies are limited on their own. They're super important when it comes to research, but they have their own limitations. So if a study does not have limitations, then that's a good red flag. Another one to look at is funding. So funding does come from all sorts of different places, and thank goodness that there are a lot of entities, a lot of grant-giving institutions that are willing to fund safety research. Some academic institutions are able to fund research on their own. There are other nonprofit organizations that fund research. And then there are always for-profit organizations that fund research as well. So one time I ran into a study, I actually did this on my podcast. It was the health benefits of maple syrup. And it was
as a Canadian, I feel that deeply.
Right. Well, it was a really interesting study. It was fairly well done in the way that the study was constructed. And, it seemed that there was a statistically significant difference in the health benefits from maple syrup. But this maple syrup study was done in Quebec, Canada, which of course is the largest maple syrup producing, province and the largest maple syrup producing country in the world. And it also was funded by the maple syrup producers of Quebec. So that's kind of a red flag. Of course, the maple syrup producers of Quebec would want, a good study on the health benefits of maple syrup. So that's just, sort of a long rant.
You always have to look out for big maple syrup.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it's true. Like if it's a for-profit, or if there's, I suppose, a vested interest, can you ever really fully trust the results? Or, I mean, how do you feel about that?
It's a good question. I think that you can. In some instances, this research would never happen unless those for-profit entities had some sort of vested interest and funded those studies to make that research possible. And when that happens, there are controls that can be put into place. So, for example, with this maple syrup study, there were controls put into place. The researchers reported that the funders had no hand in the actual study. They only provided the funds for the study to happen. So in that case, there are some different controls. If you let them give you money, but you don't let them do any of the actual work on the study, then, that's a control you can put into place to make sure the integrity of the research is sound. So yeah, again, there's just different red flags to look out for there.
The question is, why do you think there's so much bad research? But I just realized there's an assumption that there is a lot, like too much or so much. So maybe answer whether my assumption is correct and the question.
Every research study has limitations. I think the point here is not that every research study that's out there is bad. Most of them have some merit to them. The important thing is that we as practitioners or we as learners are able to look at these studies critically and understand how much value those specific studies bring to the table. So some research studies are going to be better than others. I'm not going to say that every single one is bad. There are definitely ones that if you look at very critically, and sometimes you have to have the understanding of what research should look like to be able to evaluate even if it is bad. So if you're looking at any particular study, I would say go into it with an open mind and don't go into it judging whether it's going to be good or going to be bad. Try to eliminate your own bias when you're reading these studies, but look at it critically. Did they come up with good comprehensive research questions? How large was the sample size? What type of statistical analyses did they use, and are they appropriate for the study? Not everybody's going to have that insight, but it's something to look at. And then, of course, who funded it and what are the limitations? So look at it critically, and understand that because of the limitations, not every study that's out there is going to be able to bring a lot of value to practice right away.
You mentioned qualitative and quantitative, and I'm curious about whether you have thoughts about the usefulness of qualitative versus quantitative. Like, I'm sure it's not an either or, but what's the balance? Maybe what are the pros of each, I suppose?
This is actually probably a pretty long conversation here, but I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. So there is value to both qualitative and quantitative research. I myself am a quantitative researcher, but I have found myself having to do qualitative research. Basically, the way this works, quantitative research is all numbers and it's all statistical analyses. And we're able to, mathematically calculate whether there is a relationship between two factors or more than two factors, however many factors there are. We can mathematically calculate whether that relationship exists. With qualitative research, it's more exploratory. We're asking open-ended questions, we're getting stories from individuals, and a lot of times we're looking at smaller sample sizes. So, for example, with a quantitative study, I could have thousands of participants, thousands of data points in that study. With qualitative, I may only have a dozen or a couple of dozen participants in that study. But it's not about the quantity of information, it's about the quality of information that we get from those types of studies. So a lot of times, if we have a concept that has never been looked at, it's never been studied at all, and we don't know where those relationships could possibly exist, we have to start with qualitative research so we can get those stories, we can get those perspectives and understand and try to form concepts and frameworks and try to identify where the themes are. Because once we have those, then we can figure out ways to quantitatively measure those different themes and those different frameworks. It's almost a chicken and the egg thing, but you do need the qualitative research to explore an unexplored concept so that you can then do the quantitative research. And then you've also got more comprehensive studies that are going to be mixed methods and use both. So, so it could be a lot.
Yeah, but I hadn't thought of that, having the qualitative ensure that you have some context and make sure that you're asking the right questions before you go into maybe a larger statistical study. Another point that you made in that post was that, quote, we always need more research, which I think had to do with the design and the conclusions of a lot of research. So can you explain what you meant by that?
This is actually probably another thing that you should look for in a study. If you read a study and it doesn't say more research should be done in XYZ, then it's not a good study. Every research study does end with, we need more research in this area because of the limitations. This is frustrating a lot of times for practitioners because, we look at this and we say, well, this study isn't totally conclusive. Well, no study out there is going to be totally conclusive. It takes multiple iterations of any type of research to finally prove if there's actually causation. Most of the times we're just proving whether there's correlation between concepts, a link, a relationship. These two things might be related, but we're not totally sure until we do this many, many more times. So yes, a lot of studies or most good studies are going to end with, we need more research. And yes, that is frustrating because we want to be able to put those things into practice. The best thing I could tell you is, as practitioners, we have to be able to look at that research and say, okay, there might be a link there. Maybe there's a way I can try this, put it into practice and see if it actually works for me. And then you yourself can critically evaluate whether that research is going to be, conclusive or not. The danger, though, is that academic researchers tend to silo themselves and get stuck in this silo that is continuous research over and over and over again. And we're just feeding that research cycle, and we're not really feeding practice because we're always asking for more research. To some degree, maybe there's a little bit of imposter syndrome on our part as researchers. Because of the limitations in my study, maybe I don't feel it's super valuable yet. But, the reality is if I can communicate that to practice in some way, somebody is going to find some value in that and be able to make that link. So, yes, we'll always need more research, but it doesn't mean we can't start to try things and put them into practice.
And it sounds too like researchers have to be a little bit cautious about getting tunnel vision, like not stopping to take a breath and recheck, perhaps after every study or at certain milestones, how practical, like how well the information is going to help practicing safety people. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. Probably one of the biggest things here, and I know this is probably on the docket for us to talk about, is that there are these silos with research and practice, and a lot of times there's it's difficult to get the communication between the two, and that's really what we need to overcome here. Just because we continually need more research doesn't mean we also don't continually need more practice. So we have to be able to bridge that gap to some degree.
Yeah, we'll definitely be coming back to that. And actually at the end, because I want to spend a fair bit of time talking about that point. But a few other points that you made. One was that graduate work has people jaded about research. Did you mean practitioners, researchers, or both in that case?
I think a little bit of both, probably more so on the practitioner side. So academic training landscape has totally changed, especially in occupational safety and health. Today, we have more people that are going to school for safety. 30 years ago, that wasn't the case. We had folks coming into safety from other occupations and not necessarily being academically trained to do that job. Now we have more folks pursuing that from the get-go. Now, as part of that academic training, and especially if you are in master's level or graduate level work, you're doing a lot of research, at least literature reviews to supplement your papers or your theses. So I think a lot of us can get pretty burnt out on that type of work. It's a lot of information to take in. It does take a little bit of effort to fully critically evaluate any given research study that's been published. If we didn't like that work when we were in school, we probably won't like it when we need to do it for our jobs. So it's easy, I think, for a lot of us to get jaded from all of that graduate level work. But I think maybe what needs to be communicated more during that academic training is that you are going to continually have to do this for this type of work if you want to bring research into practice. And that was actually what was really communicated when I was working on my doctoral degree.
Right. So people aren't like, okay, this is just another hoop I have to get through just to get my degree and then I can forget it. Because there are a lot of those.
Like, you are stepping into this level of training. This is now part of your life. So it's not just something you're doing to get a grade and get a degree. This is part of your life, and this is what you're going to have to do to be a good practitioner.
The last two I'm going to put together. They're not the same, but they're a little bit related. The first one was statistics are hard. And the next one was we suck at communicating research to practitioners. Let's start with what role do statistics play in that kind of information block that you're talking about?
Yeah. So
blockage, I mean. Yeah.
So first of all, I have to say that statistics are extremely important. When I did my graduate work for my master's degree, I took statistics. I did not get statistics. I never really truly understood it. Thankfully, I didn't need to have a full understanding to actually get my graduate degree. That changed when I got my doctoral degree. I needed to understand statistics. And what happened was I took what I consider to be the absolute worst statistics class I've ever taken in my life, with absolutely no help from the instructor on how to do these things. So I had to be self-taught. And once I self-taught, there was something that clicked along the way with some of these statistical calculations and how they actually translated into, a meaningful output that said, okay, now I can definitely see that there's a relationship between these two different factors or something like that. And I can see how this is going to translate to practice or translate to work. So we need those statistics. The challenge is that just like any other realm of mathematics, statistics isn't going to click with everybody. Not everybody's going to be able to fully understand what those formulas are or be able to do those calculations. And you don't have to. To be in either doing research or applying research to practice, I don't think you absolutely have to understand statistics fully. But the challenge for researchers is that those of us that are good at statistics sometimes have a difficult time translating that into something that everybody else is going to understand, because there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of specific terms that we use, that we get and any other statistician is going to get, but the layperson that has never even taken a statistics class is not going to understand that. So it's difficult for us to translate that, and I think the onus really is on us. If we're the ones that understand statistics, we are the ones that have to be able to translate that and do it better. If you go on YouTube and try to learn statistics from YouTube, or try to learn how to use SPSS, that's the statistical analysis software that I use, you're going to find probably 25 videos that you don't understand and maybe one that you do. That's at least the learning experience that I had. For those of us that understand it, we really have trouble translating for some reason. And there are a couple that are really good at it. So I think that's just something for us researchers that we have to practice. And if you do have an aptitude as a practitioner for some type of statistics, I encourage you to look into it and see if you can learn something from that. But I mean, this really does go into the overall conversation of, we just aren't good at communicating research to practitioners. There's a lot of different gaps that happen there. Number one, when we publish research, it ends up in these academic databases that are only accessible to researchers or academics. They're not accessible to practitioners without them having, they sit behind a paywall. Not everybody's going to pay to get into an academic database. They're already jaded from the graduate work, remember, so they don't want to read the articles, so they're not going to pay to read the articles. There are some other publications out there that are more open source, easier to access. So, for example, ASSP members have access to the Professional Safety Journal, which has peer-reviewed articles in there. The Board of Certified Safety Professionals, they have their Shift Journal now, which is free to access for anybody. But that's also a pretty young journal, and there's not a ton of research in there, but what's in there is really good right now. So there are different publishing avenues, I think, that researchers are getting to that are a little bit more open access. The other part to this, in traditional journals, if you want to get your article open access for anybody to access without having to pay for it, you, the researcher, have to pay for it. And a lot of times it's thousands of dollars to be able to pay for open access. So barrier after barrier after barrier, we're just not doing well at communicating research to practice. The other challenge we run into is at conferences. So we can present this stuff at conferences, but again, we have to get better at translating and presenting actionable items. I don't know how many conference sessions I've sat through that have produced some really, really good ideas that are really, really sexy, but they have absolutely nothing in there that's actionable. I can't do anything with it as a practitioner. So we have to get better at teaching when we do that research, we have to be able to translate it into something that, okay, I'm going to present this to you today. This is my big idea. These are the relationships I found. This is what I think you might be able to take. It doesn't matter if it actually happens or not. I mean, I want it to happen, but this is what I think you should be able to take from this study and put into practice right now. That's, create some action when we teach in those settings. And then, the other thing I'll say is there are a lot of different mediums for us to, in this new digital age, there are a lot more mediums for us to be able to communicate research. It's not just journals. It's not just conferences anymore. We have social media. We have TikTok. I've recently gotten somewhat okay at TikTok, and we have podcasts, right? These are great mediums that a lot of people are engaging with now. And as long as we can translate that research into something that's practicable, that's easy to understand for the practitioner, then we should continue to use those mediums. And I think academic institutions should encourage their researchers to use those mediums to communicate research. It's just going to make everybody look better, and it's going to make that research to practice thing much, much easier.
I want to back up a little bit. You were talking about the onus being on the researcher, which makes perfect sense to me. But is there, and maybe this is on the researcher too, but I was thinking about statistics when you were talking. And I remember in math, I thought, I don't care about the formula. Just tell me the implication. I want to understand the implication. Like, if you use this formula, you can discover this, right? I had no interest in actually doing the steps. But it seems to me like that's the sort of literacy level that would be helpful for practitioners in terms of understanding statistical analysis. So I don't know, maybe that's your next conference talk. I'm not sure.
Maybe, yeah. I'll give an example here, right? One of the statistical calculations that I like to use, especially when I'm doing quantitative research, is regression. I like to use linear regression to find the correlation between two variables. And it's because you get a lot of different figures from that. Now, this is one where I had to dig and dig and dig to figure out how to translate those different outputs into something that's meaningful. One of the most important things from that is that I can see, yes, there's a statistically significant relationship between two variables, but I can also see something that's called variance. I'm not going to go into the super nitty-gritty details of that, but I'm happy to walk somebody through it at some point in time. But this variance calculation is extremely important because I can see, yes, that relationship is statistically significant, but maybe the variance is only 5%, meaning that whatever this factor is doing over here is only affecting 5% of the output. So there's 95% of other factors that are affecting this output. That's extremely important. That's why it is good for us to be able to translate statistical analysis in a meaningful way, because when I put it in that perspective, the layperson can go, oh, okay, so there might be a causation thing here, but I need to go look at all of these other things that might actually be causing this thing to happen. So yes, it's a we got to get better at translating these things.
I think that's tough in every industry. Like, that's why technical writers exist, is because people who can understand the technical aspects of something and then explain it in easier terms. You've mentioned some things that you recommend. Is there anything else that, if you were to have a call to action to maybe to practitioners first and then to researchers, like what do you think would be the number one way that they could approach this to try and get through some of these barriers?
So my number one call to action for practitioners is curiosity. It's to be curious. This goes for just about everything, but especially for research. If you are presented with a headline that says study finds, and if it's something that maybe doesn't go with what you thought to be true, don't just dismiss it, be curious about it. Or maybe it's something that absolutely confirms what you already believed in your heart was true. Don't just immediately accept it, be curious about it and go and critically evaluate where that information is coming from to understand if it's really true or if it's not, or if there are limitations. It's just having a critical view and being curious about the information that's out there. Like I said, a lot of good research is being done, but everything has limitations, and not everything is able to be immediately put into practice. So critically evaluate those things before you either accept or dismiss the validity of those findings. Just as important as finding that there was a relationship between two variables. And the practitioners need to know that so that they know what they can and can't do with that information. We can't get stuck in our own bubbles. We can't just keep continuing to present research to other researchers. We have to be able to get that into the practitioner's hands in some form or fashion. It seems so basic, but get your findings down to a third grade reading level. We want everybody to be able to understand this stuff and be able to put it into practice. Don't let this stuff just sit behind a paywall. Get it on social media, get it on podcasts, get it on TikTok, get it wherever it needs to be to make sure that folks can get into the practice. And there is one other thing that I had for practitioners, and it's that engage researchers. If you are working on something in your workplace and you don't know if it's going to work, and you don't know how to come up with the things that it takes to measure whether those things are going to work, engage a researcher. They're hungry for research. They want to find new things to measure and new things to study. I guarantee you, somebody out there at some academic institution will say, yes, I would love to work with your organization and help you measure these things and see if this actually works. And then we'll publish it together.
Yeah, I imagine that researchers, there can be sort of a view that they're in an elite ivory tower or a silo, that sort of thing. But I imagine that they actually get really excited if there's an opportunity to work with, a real case study.
There's so many of us that are limited to, a lab setting. I forget which subject I was studying recently, but the biggest limitation is that it has never been studied outside of an experimental laboratory setting. They wanted the opportunity to be able to measure that in the real world, and they just weren't able to find it yet. So yeah, we're always looking for that real world application.
Awesome. Well, I have a few questions that I ask everyone at the end of the podcast. The first is, if you had a magic wand, where would you focus training for tomorrow's or the next generation of safety professionals? Obviously, training would be a wide thing, but where's a focus that either you think is underrepresented, or just needs to be really driven home for people?
Oh, so this is, hold on, let me just clarify. This is training for safety professionals or training for safety professionals to give?
Training for safety professionals, like the next generation of people who are going to go out in the field.
That's such a good question. Okay, here's one. I think one subject that safety professionals really need to understand is this behavior piece. I don't know exactly when it came out. I know it's been a few decades anyway, but there's this concept of behavioral-based safety. And yes, we have other concepts now. We have human and organizational performance. We have serious injuries and fatalities, that type of approach. All of that stuff doesn't mean that behavioral-based safety is dead. It's very much still alive. It's just that for the most part, we never really did it correctly. I think one of the most important things for us to learn is how all of these different concepts have merit. Safety 1 and Safety 2 both have merit. BBS and HOP and SIF, they all have merit, something that we can bring to the table. It's going in again with an open mind and being able to look at the parts of that are going to work for my organization and my application, and figuring out what I need to measure to make sure that those things are working. So yes, maybe it's having an open mind and looking at all these things critically, and pulling the things out of those that make sense for you and your organization.
Great. Well, if you could go back in time to the beginning of your safety career, is there any advice that you would give to yourself?
Oh, if I could go back in time, I don't know. There's a lot of different red flags that so I had the benefit of actually starting out in a pretty not a fantastic setting for longevity in my career, because obviously I didn't stay there that long, but it was a really good setting to learn all of the things that should and shouldn't be done in a safety program. I really don't have any regrets about that. It was a good learning experience. If I were to tell myself one thing, it would be to focus on the experience and not the dollars. I needed the dollars at the time to live, to eat,
don't we
and
all?
breathe.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that experience was super valuable. And if I had thought about it a little bit more without the monetary context, I would have said, continue to get more experience like this, expand on that, and what else can I learn and what else can I experience that I can bring to the table and help somebody else in later on in my career.
That's great. Some people say I wouldn't tell myself anything because I wouldn't listen to myself. So,
well, I don't know if I would listen to myself, but I would try.
Well, I guess that's a totally separate question.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't listen to me. I probably am one of them, and I still try.
How can our listeners learn more about the topics in our discussion today? Like, are there any books or obviously your podcast? Are there any websites or publications that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I can always recommend some, when it comes to the statistical analysis stuff, I don't know if there's any really good publications I could recommend to anybody who just doesn't want to learn statistics. So, but I do highly recommend listening to the podcast. It's Prove It To Me. It's real research, real data, no BS. That's the tagline of the podcast. But I oftentimes am bringing on guests that are talking about their own research or talking about research that they've been able to put into practice. Or in the off times when I don't have a guest, I'm running through different studies in occupational health or safety or nutrition, lifestyle, different things that are interesting. And I evaluate whether they're good or bad. And I do my best to take all of these technical terms and put them into, something that is understandable for anybody. And maybe you don't get anything from that study specifically, but you'll get at least how I evaluated it so that you can better critically evaluate research in the long run. There's my website, drmattlaw.com. All my entire portfolio is on there, as well as, links to the podcast and other things like that. Any questions that come up about these different things, I'm happy to provide some different resources to help.
Yeah. So that leads me into, other than what you've mentioned, where can our listeners find you on the web? Like if they want to reach out, email, LinkedIn, or...
Yeah. So you can email contact@drmattlaw.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm definitely on LinkedIn. It's just Matt Law. If you Google Matt Law Safety, I'll come up. I tried this the other day. It does work.
Great. Well, that is our podcast for today. Thank you to our listeners, and thank you, Matt, for joining me.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
As always, thanks to the Safety Labs team working behind the scenes to bring you these wise and wonderful guests. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.